First Alert. Welcome to This Week in Kansas with your host, Tim Brown.
Hello and welcome to This Week in Kansas. Thank you for being with us this morning. Municipal elections were held across the state this week, and many citizen towns will see new faces in city government. One of the biggest impacts of those elections is a marijuana referendum that passed in Wichita. What impact will this have on the state? And a voting lawsuit appears to be going nowhere with Secretary of State Kris Kobach. Kobach says the request to analyze votes from November's elections is too late and he won't honor the demand. And we'll have the latest from Topeka, but let's start with municipal elections and their impact, and very interesting series of elections across the state. And, of course, we were kind of keeping a close eye on Wichita since that's where we are based. And we had our mayoral referendum forum, whatever you want to call it, forum, I guess, last week, which was interesting. But we also had the folks that were supporting the marijuana referendum on the show. And I got to admit, guys, I was stunned with the way that vote turned out. Maybe I should have been. Some polling showed that it was going that way, but I was pretty shocked.
Well, the marijuana initiative, there's a lot of misinformation, so let's just start with the basics. What was the ordinance that was passed? Currently, under Kansas state law, it's an A misdemeanor to be found in possession of marijuana. What that means is you're subject to from 0 to 1 year in jail and from 0 to $2,500 in fines. The ordinance said no longer would it be a crime, it would be a civil penalty of $50. So there'd still be a consequence, but it lowered the threshold of crime. And that caused some consternation in Topeka with some of my more conservative friends. The Attorney General has weighed in. There's a lot of litigation going on. But I think it will start a conversation about what we want as a community, not only in Wichita, but in Kansas, about marijuana and marijuana laws.
Consternation in Topeka, Bob.
Yeah, and so now we have, we've lived for a while with the tension at the federal level. Marijuana is still, I think, quite severe penalties for possession at the federal level, but there are many states that have medicinal use of marijuana and a handful that have outright legalization, including our nearest neighbor to the west, Colorado. Yep. So now we have at least the potential for a similar type of tension between the city of Wichita and the state government up in Topeka. So as Representative Ward members, I think the city of Wichita has asked the district court here for an opinion. The Attorney General this afternoon asked the state Supreme Court to weigh in. My question is how vigorously will the city of Wichita legal team defend the results of this election? Will they vigorously make the case that the people of Wichita have spoken, and even though it conflicts with the state law, can we still have the law implemented in Wichita?
Well, another interesting aspect of this, Bob, is we have the Republicans running the show in Topeka, and oftentimes we hear Republicans talk about autonomy from the federal government. They want states to be more autonomous. They want limited government. And Jim, I'm kind of wondering if our limited government friends are going to sing that same tune.
I'm laughing because when anybody says local government, everyone in Topeka on both sides rolls their eyes, because local control is a term used when it helps your position.
Of course.
My more conservative friends used it a lot when they did the block grant,
yeah.
But on a series of other votes said, no, it's better that the state make these decisions. And so the conflict between ideology and practical politics always comes into play. The legal stuff, if I were to predict, and I haven't talked to any of the lawyers involved, but my prediction is I think the city will let the Attorney General take the lead with the Supreme Court, because that would have statewide impact, and that way they don't have to come into the politics of it, because most of the people who voted from the city council are still on that council. And so, and you can't, it is a very dangerous, Kansans like to vote, and they like to know that their votes count, and that the policymakers respect their vote. So the way the city deals with the vote, where 55% of the population who voted said that they wanted a change in marijuana punishments in Wichita. That's a very delicate balance. That's why I think they'll tend to let the AG take the lead in this at the Supreme Court level.
Bob, they talked at one point about changing, or actually trying to push this referendum on a state level. And, we haven't really seen anything there, but it's interesting. This could be maybe a first step, maybe set the stage a little bit for some state changes potentially down the road.
Well, perhaps. And about a month ago, the Attorney General came out with just his opinion that this Wichita law would be in conflict. He advised the City Council to remove it from the ballot. And he said the problem is they petitioned the wrong place. Now, petition has another several meanings, but in Kansas, we do have initiative at the municipal level, and that's what the supporters of this initiative did. They gathered signatures and forced the city council to either make a decision in their favor or put it on the ballot, which is what happened. We don't have that type of initiative and referendum capability at the state level. So maybe the Attorney General will petition your legislator, just ask him, you know, I'm in favor of this, but we don't have a way to force that type of action at the state level.
Interesting. Now, we also had obviously some elections across the state, municipal elections, and here in Wichita, you know, one of the big ones was for mayor. Jeff Longwell was running against Sam Williams, and Jeff Longwell won. Interesting race. Longwell was a city council member, longtime city council member, had been in politics. Sam Williams, a retired businessman, ran an ad agency here in town and was kind of viewed as maybe an outsider from a political standpoint. That one, as we went into the election, I was not surprised by the outcome, but I also kind of thought that maybe Sam was going to make a run at it at the end.
Just talking inside baseball, the minutia politics, especially with very short election cycles. I mean, we were only talking about a month from when they really got started to the primary and another month for the general. It's very short. Yep. When the primary came back and Jeff had won that, it became incumbent upon Sam to do something to change the dynamics, because people had already decided. You probably thought they were going to stay with that choice, but if not, you as the challenger at that point, Sam, and he did. In fact, he stumbled out of the block with that whole thing of the sales tax. Did you vote for it, or did you vote for it before you changed your, and how that all worked out. So he lost a week or two in a short cycle explaining that. And then, you know, just Jeff was well known, had been in, like you said, politics, municipal politics. And from people who study this, the people who vote in local elections are different. Everybody votes for president. If you vote for president. Yep. But whether they show up for governor's races, that off-year election that we just had, but they tend to be, not all of them, but they tend to be very plugged into city issues, whether it be the arena, Ambassador Hotel, zoning in their local area, fire issues. They're very involved in that. And so I thought Jeff had that background, and then when Sam stumbled out of the block coming out of the primary, I thought it made it look hard.
Bob, Sam got pretty aggressive, though, and that's one thing that he did do. I think he tried to crank up the heat a little bit, and you know, some folks may have viewed that as a sign of desperation. Others just said it's good politics. Were you surprised by how this one went?
Well, I had no idea who would win, and I had kind of a live action minute-by-minute spreadsheet going of some local vote results. And for the mayor's race, I put in a column for write-ins, because Jennifer Wynn, who had run the primary, she kind of had a semi-active write-in campaign. And there was another lady named Solma Arias, who's somewhat well-known for the Sunflower Community Action League. Yep. She had a write-in campaign. I even saw some yard signs out for her. So I thought, well, maybe the write-ins will be bigger than the margin between Longwell and Williams. But even if you gave all the write-in votes to Sam Williams, he would have only gotten about 40%. So it was really a pretty big margin. I don't know, Tim. I was kind of really shocked at some of the news media coverage of the campaign up to the election. I really think we were let down. For example, when Wichita Eagle did a fact check, they said, a Williams ad said that Longwell supported government handouts for low-paying jobs and then chastised voters when they rejected his plan. And the Eagle said, well, no, you never chastise them. But the Eagle reported a few years before that he called a petition drive by AFP, and one that I was involved in, he called it disappointing. He said they had sour grapes. When they pull these kind of stunts, they continue to lose credibility. Does that sound like chastising? I think it is. So the Wichita Eagle doesn't even recognize its own reporting when they did these fact check articles, and I think KWCH had the same problem. So that was very frustrating, I think, for the Williams campaign.
Were you surprised by the margin?
Yes, I thought it would be very close.
Yeah, I was a little surprised by the margin as well. Guys, let's take a break. When we come back, let's talk about this voting lawsuit that was filed by a professor at Wichita State. We'll have the latest on that.
Spas this weekend only at the Hartman Arena in Park City. Take advantage of major manufacturers and warehouses clearing out all inventory. All inventory 40 to 60% off. See rows and rows of spas, hot tubs, swim spas, saunas, above ground pools, 18-foot above ground pool, only $15.99. Come see the revolutionary swim spas, 12 months interest-free financing. It's the Pool Spa and Swim Spa sale this weekend only at Hartman Arena. For more details, call 1-800-SPA-SALE. That's 1-800-SPA-SALE, or log on to poolandspashow.com. Free parking and free admission.
If you like quality and selection, you'll love Yoder's Ornamental Concrete in Burton. With the best selection of fountains, bird baths, planters, benches, yard lights, animals, and figurines. You're sure to find the right piece for the right spot at your home or office. Since 1984, the Yoder family has been committed in making the finest of quality statuary. The largest statuary outlet in Kansas, located on Highway 50 in Burton, Kansas. That's Yoder's Ornamental Concrete.
And welcome back. We talked, in fact, last week a little bit about this lawsuit that was filed by a statistics professor at Wichita State University to try to get the results of the November elections from Secretary of State Kris Kobach. And it was interesting because Secretary Kobach came out this week and said no, that wouldn't happen, that they'd passed the deadline and she needed to request that information as an open records request earlier. She said she did and was told no. So interesting couple of comments there, and it makes you wonder what's going to happen with this. Will she get the information?
Well, first of all, Wichita State mathematician. She's a statistician. That's her job. She likes to play with
and that stuff.
And she likes to play with numbers. And she's been playing with election numbers for the last couple of cycles, and saw what she thought was an anomaly. And as I understand it, and I'm not a mathematician, I can do arithmetic, but this, physics and all of that wasn't my. But what she says is, for some reason, in larger, where more people vote in a precinct, the spread between Democrats and Republicans got bigger. More Republican votes showed up, and that wasn't explained to her satisfaction. So what she wants is to look at the data to see if that what appears to be an anomaly is actually there when she looks at the data in Sedgwick County. Now, I don't know her political affiliation. I know she's not a party activist from Democrat side. I haven't seen her on the Republican side. I think she's just a person who's interested in how this works and was surprised when she couldn't get the numbers to play with.
If you've ever talked to a statistician, they have odd hobbies, and I'm sorry, it's their thing. So. But they like to look at numbers, as you said, and this is the kind of thing that I think it would be fascinating. Actually, it is fascinating. It's fascinating to me, and I'm not a statistician. It's fascinating to political scientists. We talked about this on the show right after the November elections. There were a lot of political scientists that said they'd really like to dig into the numbers and do a statistical analysis. And Bob, I think it's interesting, and you were talking about this during the break, and some folks call it the red shift, and you kind of see that widening that gap.
Yes, and that I did take 2 elections in Sedgwick County and found the pattern that not only Dr. Clarkson noticed, but there was a paper with a nationwide scope a few years ago that came out, and this trend had been noticed in about a dozen states or so, and curiously always in the direction of favoring Republican candidates. And during primaries when it happened, it favored the traditional Republican over a more Tea Party type of, or libertarian type of Republican. So yeah, and what's funny about this is, if anything is Kris Kobach's signature issue, it's voter fraud, and here's something where there may very well be fraudulent something or other going on. We just don't know. I think, like Dr. Fox explained last week, there could be some other cause for this that's totally innocent. We don't know, but I think we need to investigate. Secretary Kobach's relying on Kansas law that says these ballots are sealed. If that is in fact what the law says, then I think we need to change the law so that we can look at these.
And in fairness, I have read nothing, and I'm going to try to get Dr. Clarkson on the show. I'll say that right now. But I've read nothing to indicate that Dr. Clarkson says that there's voter fraud going on. She's not making that statement. She just sees an anomaly, and she really wants to study it. That's what statisticians do. I do think it's interesting, and I do think it bears some look. And I remember after the November elections, we sat around and talked about this off the air, and there were a bunch of us, and the polling numbers were just so far off that everybody was just scratching their heads, because polling numbers have been wrong in the past, but these were uniformly wrong, and they were uniformly wrong by a long ways. And it was just one of those things where you really wonder how they could be that far off. And I think it's fascinating.
I think Kris is making a mistake, because he is a highly controversial Secretary of State. There are 20,000 Kansans being suppressed right now, unable to vote. There's a lot of things he's done that are very controversial. The one thing that we should all agree on is that when the votes are cast, they're counted, and they're counted for the candidates they're counted for. If there's a problem, and I agree with your analysis, I've dealt with 3 local election commissioners, all of which have been of high quality and high standards. I have some issues with Tabitha, but not about her integrity in terms of counting the votes. So I don't think there's any intentional fraud, but I could be proved wrong. Somebody who runs those machines may be doing that. But
And
I
I
think
was-
it's a mistakes. And
Yeah, I was cautious about this at first because I wondered, the machine that's in the voting, the tape that's in the voting machine, does it have anything that would trace those votes back to individual voters? So Tuesday when I voted, I watched very carefully with each button that I pressed what material was printed on the tape. And I don't believe there's anything personally identifiable. And the more I think about it, just the way the voting works and anything, I don't think there would be. So that's not an issue. People's votes are still going to be confidential. Although I think with the mail-in ballots, I'm pretty sure that they could potentially be traced back to actually cast it. But I don't see any reason why, if a legislative change is needed, why don't we do this and get these tapes out in the open, and let's try to understand if something is going right or wrong in Kansas elections.
And this is again one of those issues, and Jim, I think you said it well. I don't understand why Kris Kobach would be against this. He has campaigned heavily. He's talked a lot about voter fraud and the fact that he wants to keep voter fraud from happening. He wants to prosecute voter fraud. So he should welcome something like this, I would think. And it's a head scratcher to me.
Well, and she's a statistician. I mean, and if he wants to have a statistician watch her, that's great, or do his own analysis, that's great. But I mean, I think that's one of the things people expect, to be able to look over the shoulder of the people who vote, count the votes, to make sure everything's on the up and up.
I agree. All right, we're going to take another commercial break. When we come back, we'll talk about the legislature and the very latest, and budget, and taxes, and all that good stuff. We'll be back.
Mattress Firm.
We haven't replaced this mattress in years.
Feels like 16 years.
How can you tell that?
Well, after 8 years, your mattress practically doubles in weight from dead skin, sweat, and dust mites.
Dust mites?
Millions of them.
Seriously? Millions?
Maybe more. According to your tag, this mattress is 16 years old.
Check your mattress tag. If it's over 8, it's time to replace.
Let's go get your new mattress.
Mattress Firm. Save money, sleep happy.
The best advertising a company can get is what other people say about them.
The sales staff at Jabara's is fantastic.
Great selection and amazing inventory and great prices.
Selection?
Price.
Convenience.
What brings me back to Jabara's is the people, the availability of everything that I need.
Real customers, good advice. Come see us at Jabara's Superstore.
And welcome back. Lawmakers are still struggling as to what to do with the budget and how we're going to. Are we going to raise taxes? Are we not going to raise taxes? Are we going to slow down our tax cut plan? What are we going to do to try to balance this thing out? There's an interesting article in the Atlantic this week about Governor Brownback's his experiment, and it wasn't particularly a glowing review. But you know, what's Jim? You're up there. What's the latest? What are you guys doing right now? You're on break.
Yeah, spring break for legislators is what we.
And you guys hanging out down at Cheney Lake? And,
no.
Okay.
What now happens for legislators is you go to your neighborhood meetings, you do your coffees, you get around and talk to people and kind of see what the public sentiment is about it so far. With the budget, here's what's happened. The Senate committee has put together a budget, sent it to the Senate floor. They had a full debate and passed it out. It's about $670 million short. It's about a $6.5 billion budget. The revenues at last estimate were about $5.8 billion, so we got a gap of $700 million in both years, in 2016 and 2017. The House committee has put together a budget, passed it out, but it has not been on the House floor. And then the creative thing happened, which is we ignored the House floor and went into conference where you work out the differences between Senate ideas and House ideas, and they have come up with some sort of semi-compromise that included 3 members from the House, the entire Senate debating the bill, and 3 members from the Senate. But there's still $680 million difference between what they passed and what they have in the bank. And in about a week, the smart people go in the room after income taxes come in and analyze the revenues and then give us an estimate of what they expect the revenues to be for the next year or the next 6 months until November. By all accounts, even by some of my more conservative friends, the number will be down. The question is it 500 million, 100 million, 200? The bigger the number is down, the bigger the gap comes between the budget they passed and the revenue they have. And the problem is the people who will vote for the budget won't vote for the taxes. The people who vote for the taxes would never vote for a budget that doesn't fix schools better or do some other things. So they have a Rubik's Cube that they have not yet figured out. They being the Republicans who control both branches of government and the more conservatives that control the branches of both governments.
And Bob, by law, they have to balance this thing.
Yeah, well, not exactly balance. I mean, we didn't balance last year, did we? But we had a surplus that we used to spend. So, but that surplus is gone now, I believe. So, we do have to do something a little bit different this year. So, yeah, and, you know, the governor is in favor of some tax increases, and you know, I wouldn't be surprised to see a sales tax increase rolled out again, because that is one way to raise, I think, pretty big amounts of money fairly quickly, a statewide sales tax.
Which we've seen before and was supposed to sunset but stuck around. I mean, these consumption taxes they're popular with some folks, but they also, I think that may be, again, a challenging one for the governor to get passed.
Well, as we know, we've talked about this a lot during the sales tax debate in Wichita last year, that Kansas is one of the few states that tax groceries, and only Mississippi has a higher statewide tax on groceries. So that's, I think, very punitive to low-income families, and so that would be a hurdle, I think, that the governor would have to overcome, or the legislature too, if they wanted to add more sales tax. Well,
and I've said this before, and Jim, you can weigh in on this one. These regressive taxes are, in my mind, just wrong morally. I think they're very wrong, because if you make $100,000 a year, you're taxed for the same amount on that $2 loaf bread as the guy who makes $10 an hour, and I just don't think it's fair.
No, it's not. And in fact, if you look at what's happened in the 5 years that Governor Brownback's in town, sales taxes have gone up, property taxes have gone up, and I've always said 191,000. Well, the new data shows about 300,000 Kansans who make income aren't paying income tax on that because of the form of business. And Bob's absolutely right. All of the things that historically we've done to fix holes, like spend our savings account, our ending balance, it's gone. They spent it in the last year. Rated the highway fund, we're up to $2.1 billion, postponing maintenance programs. The secretary says if any more money comes out, we'll have to start delaying promised projects around the state. So it really is time that we start addressing the fact that 300,000 Kansans aren't paying income tax while still using services, and we should address that.
And at the same time, we're also looking at a potential huge increase on taxes for farmers right now.
Well, there was a bill that, and this goes back to, it used to be urban-rural was the biggest divide in the legislature. It really was. It was even more important than party politics, was urban-rural. It has, in past years, it's gotten less divisive until a senator from Johnson County well, there's two bills. One is to change the way you assess property taxes on farmland, which would be a huge property tax increase. Yep. And the second thing was to take the sales tax exemption for farm machinery off, which would raise the cost of equipment, which is already high. And so you now see the conflict. I don't think either one of those goes anywhere, but there are people who believe they might in the final package. No one knows what it will look like at 3 o'clock in the morning.
All right, let's take a commercial break. When we come back, we'll continue our conversation about what's happening in the legislature and what's to come. We'll be back in a minute.
When we first worked with Kitchen Tune-Up, it was at another residence. They met our deadline, our timelines, choices that they had, and the selections that they gave us were very much to our liking. Kitchen Tune-Up was awesome.
Only Marvel's biggest superfan could assemble the world's mightiest heroes. Downey Jr., Hemsworth, Ruffalo, Evans, Johansson, and Renner. Bam! With a sneak peek at Avengers: Age of Ultron. New Kimmel, Monday on ABC.
I'm Derek Schmidt, your Kansas Attorney General. After a storm, scam artists often roll into town disguised as legitimate contractors and offering deals that sound good. If recent storms have damaged your roof, be especially cautious and don't sign a contract for repairs until you confirm that your roofer is registered with the Attorney General's office as required by law. To check the roofer registry and for more information about staying safe after the storms, visit www.inyourcornerkansas.org.
And welcome back. We've got about 5 minutes left in the show, and I want to hit a couple of odds and ends. We've got some big issues too with the legislature, but we'll try to bang all these out in the next 4 minutes and 49 seconds. One thing we had we had a good time on the show several times with the bill that would have required college professors, people who worked in universities not to be able to use their titles when they wrote letters to the editor and things like that. What's the latest?
I think the bill's dead for this year, but we used to say if you ever die, you want to get buried in Topeka because never anything ever dies forever up there. But I think the outcry against that bill was so high, I would be surprised if there's any enthusiasm for hearings or any kind of vote on it in the future.
Yeah, all right. School finance, we've talked a little bit about the block grant plan. What happens next with that, and what happens with the lawsuit? Where are we going with that? And Bob, you can jump in on any of these.
Okay. The first part,
well,
go ahead.
School finance, I mean, the block grant is the spending part, but I believe one objection that was raised to the block grant is that, to the block grant bill that passes, that it's not a funding bill, so money still has to be found to pay what the state has decided to pay.
Yeah, and we're still in that big hole.
If we have that big gap, the 50 cents of every dollar goes to schools. So if you do it just on cuts, where there are several of my colleagues say just on cuts, the school block grant goes down even more. So that's out there. The lawsuit, there's two big dates coming up. May 7th, I think the 3-judge panel has all the players coming in, where they issued that, remember, right after the block grant, they sent out a little opinion that says bring the Secretary of State and the revisor and all the people who are involved with sending out the checks. And remember that we can take temporary action to protect the status. And then the Supreme Court's looking at it in June.
Oh my. Municipal elections. We talked about municipal elections earlier, but the idea here is to possibly move them to the fall.
I don't think there's a possible. After the results across the state, my more conservative colleagues will push very hard to get those changed.
Bob,
so
what do you
that's
think?
going
Good
to the fall of even numbered years, is that right?
Well, that hasn't passed either house. What the Senate passed was odd number of years.
But I think the House has amended that to even.
No, the conference committee, the House didn't have a chance to vote on this. This is another example where the Speaker has prevented debate, but they went to conference anyway. And they agreed in conference to make it even number of years. The problem is you can't bring things that haven't passed at least one house to the floor. That's way in the weeds procedure, but it's important procedure here, whether or not they can legally bring that on the floor.
Very interesting.
But I think our voter turnout in Sedgwick County for the election that was just this week was, I got it, 16%, although in the city of Wichita I calculated it was almost 19%. You know, we had a pretty rip-roaring mayor election plus the marijuana, but still we're only to 18-point-something% turnout. So,
yeah, which is too bad, because these are, I mean, these are huge issues, and it's just, you know, I don't know.
You know, there was something curious that also happened in this election that I just don't know how to explain it. There was a school board election for this district that's the south and southwest of Wichita, although that election was held across all of USD 259, so not quite the same boundaries as the city of Wichita, but it was a lot of people voting. The incumbent, a man named Jeff Davis, who's been on the board for either 1 or 2 terms, I can't remember, he had filed for election but then decided he didn't want the seat. So he endorsed his opponent, but nonetheless, Jeff Davis won with 54%. And it was well known that he was campaigning for and endorsed his opponent. So that's a head scratcher. How does something like that happen?
Interesting. About 30 seconds left, Jim. Medicaid expansion going to happen this year?
Until the gavel falls at sine die, there's always a chance. There's a lot of momentum for Medicaid expansion, and the numbers work. And a new article just out yesterday or today, a study of 9 states that said it improved their ending balance, provided additional money for spending on other things, because you could stop spending money on other things that would be covered by Medicaid expansion. Mental health would be covered because you have a ticket now. Drug and alcohol. There's a lot of things that we pay for out of state general funds that would now get paid for by Medicaid, so it would increase ending balances.
And there's a lot of Republicans right now that are supporting this.
Especially rural Republicans whose hospitals are in very deep financial trouble.
Interesting. Well, we will keep our eyes on all of this, and of course we'll talk more about it next week. So it's always we always have plenty to talk about. Thank you very much for watching the show. Thank you for being on the show. If you have any questions or comments, please email me at thisweekinkansas@cake.com. I hope you have a wonderful week.
You never know where life is going to